Damian Hughes is a best-selling author and expert in sport, organisational development and change psychology. He has written 8 best-selling books. His latest books, High Performance and How to Change Your Life, both topped the Sunday Times bestseller list and have been translated into 12 languages. A visiting Professor of Organisational Behaviour and Change at Manchester Metropolitan University since 2010, Damian co-hosts the High Performance podcast, which has over 250 million downloads. He has also worked with elite sports teams including England Rugby League and Scotland Rugby Union. He's such a great guy as well. We've been chatting in there. Honestly, I'm nearly late because we've just been chatting about all sorts of things. So hopefully we'll be able to, bounce off each other over the next hour. He's going to stay around afterwards, have a bite to eat, and he's more than happy to have a chat with anybody afterwards as well. But we'll do some Q&A at the end like we have been the last few nights. Please give a really warm T2 Retreat welcome to Professor Damian Hughes.
Hi, good evening.
Now, in usual fashion, I forgot my cards. So
You go and get them.
Shall I go and
You go get them.
So it was going so well because I read your introduction out. Last night I ballsed it up, right? I read your introduction out, and last night I really messed it up, didn't I? So I don't know if you saw it. On my face, I was concentrating on all of those words.
My introduction you read out last night. Oh, right. Did you call me Damien Hirst? That's one.
I was concentrating on all of those words, and I thought, I've nailed it. And then I turned around and thought, where's my question cards? But it's never happened. It's here. So take a seat, Damien. So the latest book, how many books was that you've written?
12 now. So this the one that came out last year was 12.
Do you like writing? Because I've done 2 and I hate it. And to do 12, that's pretty much good staying power. That.
Yeah. My wife calls me a secret geek, so I love the process of writing. I get excited by the blank page, and yeah.
Love that, mate. Right, 3 quick fire questions to start off with. You can only answer really shortly and succinctly. Is that all right?
Sure, yep.
Question 1: who is the best guest you have ever interviewed?
The best guest, I'm going to say, is Dame Stephanie Shirley. So that's a name that people... Your reaction is exactly what I did when I first heard her. Are you familiar with her? Right. She's the one, I can imagine. If you were an interviewer and you probably sat down with someone like Nelson Mandela, you'd probably cite him, and if you asked why, you go, the world is a different place because Nelson Mandela existed. Dame Stephanie Shirley is the equivalent of that to me. So her story is incredible. She's 93 now, but she came over to the UK at 5 on the Kinder transport at the end of World War II. She lost her mum and dad. She got fostered by a family in the Midlands. When she was there, she tells a story that the family that fostered her, her neighbours said to her, "How lucky are you that you were saved?" So that one question of how lucky am I to have been saved, she asks herself it every night when she puts her head on the pillow. Have I made my life one worth saving? So what she does from the age of 5 onwards is she gets nurtured. She's got a mathematics skill. She gets nurtured. Young girls don't do mathematics in post-war Britain. The foster family push for it. She then sets up a business, and she can't get a bank account because she's a single woman. So she changes her name to Steve Shirley. On the letter, she gets a bank account. So she then starts employing women, mainly women, working at home on the kitchen table, doing early prototypes for black boxes for Concorde. She builds this business up and sells it in 2000 for £2.3 billion. And now she's the first person to voluntarily fall off the Sunday Times rich list, because in the 25 years since, she basically gives all the wealth away that she works with charities and sets up foundations for young people with autism. Now, just that one little snapshot I'm giving you, you're like, why have I never heard of her? And I'm sat there thinking, we should have been taught about you at school. Like, as great as Anne Boleyn is and the story of Emily the Eighth Wives, I think I'd have benefited more from learning about a giant that walks amongst us. Like the world is a different place because Dame Stephanie Shirley exists. And like, you've got daughters, I've got a daughter. And it was one of the few interviews I came home from, and I was telling my daughter about it. She's 12, and I was like, you will walk through doors in your life that this lady kicked down for you, that you won't even know those doors were once ever shut, and this lady kicked them down. And for her to sit opposite us at 93 and share the wisdom, the lessons, the sort of experiences, like, to me, there was a couple of times where I was choked up. So yeah, I'd definitely put her top of the list for that.
I mean, it's amazing. So, but these quick fire questions are going well, aren't they?
Sorry, yeah.
I loved it, mate. I love it. Love it. Right. We can go wherever we want with it, right?
Sorry.
So, question 2. What's harder, parenting or podcasting?
Oh, definitely parenting. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Like, I can admit I don't know what I'm doing with podcasting. Yeah.
I'm doing all right.
Yeah, well, but parenting, yeah, that's like I don't think there's anything I've ever done that we say about my son. My son's going through, started GCSEs today, and I don't know if anyone drives you as mad as my son does. Do you know what I mean? That I can sometimes find myself getting so angry at somebody I love so much. Yeah, that's by far. And I'll give you a tip if you're interested. There's a brilliant book I've started reading recently, and it's the most gifted book I've given out in the last 18 months. There's an Australian psychologist called Steve Biddulph. He's amazing. And before I became a dad, I was sort of like reading the books and things like that. And he wrote 2 books called Raising Boys and Raising Girls that I found really useful, that are still used now, some of the stuff. But about 10 years ago, he wrote a book called Manhood. And if you've got young boys in your life, I would really advocate, get the book and just read it. I've given it to Southgate, Thomas Tuchel, Steve Borthwick the other week. I've given it to them because for young men in this society, like, I'll tell you a quick story from it, that in the 1970s, Mattel, that makes like Barbie, Mattel tried to launch a brand of dolls, a family. It was called the Hart family. So it was a mum, a dad and 2 kid dolls. And when they started playing it with the kids would play and leave the dad on the side. And it'd be the mum and the 2 kids that they'd play with. And when they asked them, said, why is dad not involved? They went, oh, dad's not here. He's always at work. So rather than changing the perception, what Mattel did as a consequence of that was create Action Man. So the idea of a man then has to have big muscles, has to fight, has to kill people. So it just reinforces this perception that dads can't be soft, dads can't be emotional, dads can't be connected to the family unit. You've got to make them the ultimate warrior sort of thing. And there's just lots of things like that force you to re-question your view of mental. That's my tip for you. If you want to read a really thought-provoking book, Steve Biddulph's Manhood is well worth it.
Me hoping you was going to say my book.
Well, I have read your book. I've read both of them, and I've told you, didn't I, on the phone? I just said your book, I thought, took some very complex topics and made it so accessible, that I've thoroughly enjoyed it. So I would recommend Martin's books as well.
Thank you very much, Damian. Right. Third quickfire question. For those who don't know, the podcast, Damian does it with a guy called Jake Humphrey. Not Humphreys, it's Jake Humphrey. He goes mad about that, apparently, doesn't he?
Yes, he does.
So, Jake Humphrey. So, my question to you is Jake Humphrey really always that positive?
No, he isn't. He's a great bloke. He gets... are you familiar with... So, he's somebody that gets a terrible sort of social media rinsing, and to me it's one of the ills of our society that social media gets away with the consequences of some of the stuff and I've seen the human impact of what it does to him when people sort of go after him. His heart is in the right place. He's a great bloke, and people can often take stuff and just put it through the filter of social media and then rinse somebody or make their life really miserable for it. And so you'll never hear me say a bad word about Jake, but I am aware sometimes the perception can be, it's easy to lampoon or make fun of them, and it's often just a really sort of sad indictment of our society.
Yeah, it makes sense. So you begin every podcast with every single guest by asking the guest this question. You say, what is your definition of high performance? Yeah. Now, I've given mine earlier in the kickoff.
Which was?
So I'm not going to tell you, right? So I'm going to say, so Damian, what is yours?
Well, it's a brilliant question. Not because I ask it. No, it's because like we've done nearly 400 interviews now with the lead performers, and we haven't had a consistent answer in 400 occasions of asking the question. So you might go, well, what does that take? Well, actually, that's because high performance is not a definition. It's for you to define it. It's not like it was Marrow Itoje, and has been named as a Lions captain today. He was the first guy that went, don't get this mixed up with world-class performance. World-class is an objective set of standards that you have to be to get to a certain position. High performance is subjective. You have to define it. So I've got two definitions, but I'll tell you where I stole them from, so I can't lay claim to them. The first one I ever came up with was I was in Hotel Football, which is opposite Old Trafford, and it's owned by Beckham and Gary Neville and all the class of '92 guys. And we were doing an interview with Phil Neville, who was at the time the England Lionesses football head coach. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but during the pandemic, they opened the hotel free of charge for NHS workers. So if you were working in the NHS, you could go and get respite and just stay in the hotel. So when I was chatting with Phil, we were having a cup of tea, and I just complimented him on it. I said, I saw what you did. I thought it was fantastic. And he just went, well, you know what? In life, sometimes you just got to do the best you can with what you've got in the moment you're in. And he said it so casually and threw it away. I said, Phil, just go back and say that again. And he just repeated it. And that, to me, really spoke something quite profound, because the best you can is different than the best I can. The moment you're in is different than mine. The resources you have are going to be different. So that sort of allows you to go, well, if you can answer yes to those three questions yourself, you're achieving high performance, because there is nothing more you can give. So I love that. That's my first one. And then I met this guy called Charles Duhigg.
That is exactly what we talked about in Morning One. We called it optimal performance and said it's about going through the drudgery moments in the flow, and you can do the best you can with the resources you have in the time you were given. And the byproduct of that will be, over a period of time, high performance outcomes.
Yeah, just definitely.
Stick at it, yeah.
But I'll give you another one that really resonated with me, and it was from a Pulitzer Prize winning author called Charles Duhigg. And again, I went, you know what, I could use that. He said, high performance aim was having high aspirations, but, and excuse my language here, not giving up the best of your life by going after them. And I thought, that's brilliant, because how often do you meet people that trade family time, trade the health, trade lots of different aspects of their life to go after that singular definition? And I like that idea. To me, it spoke about something being more rounded, of going after having high aspirations, but making sure that you don't torch the other parts of your life.
I love that, mate. I love that. Even when you said it, just made me, I looked up a little bit, makes you reflect, makes you think about it. Because I'm probably a bit guilty myself.
Yeah, definitely. Same here.
Okay, right. Again, we could probably sit on here for 3 hours. I can tell already,
yeah,
right?
Sorry for not.
No, mate, it's perfect. This is perfect. Right. So let me come to something I read in the book that really stood out to me. Right. And it made me think about how I can incorporate this. It's called the Xander letter.
Yeah.
Now, not only the reason it stood out is because my son is called Xander, spelt with a Z.
Yeah.
And so I thought, what's that? But having read it, I thought, wow, that is something so simple to do. And I can see psychologically what we know through neuroscience and psychology. I can see how that works. Yeah. So it was Robin van Persie, who was a footballer. He was a footballer for Arsenal.
Yeah,
and he used it. But yeah, the Xander letter, anybody can use it. Do you want to explain what it is?
So I'll give you the context of where Robin van Persie described it. He was a young lad. He was a footballing prodigy. He got brought over from the Netherlands to Arsenal at quite a young age, and then sort of failed to materialise his potential for the first 3 or 4 years. And the French football coach Arsene Wenger was his manager, and he told the story that Wenger came over to him one day and said, "Why are you not world class?" And he said felt like a slap in the face. And he went, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, why are you not world class? Your potential is world class, and you're not it." And he went, "Well, who is?" And he went, "Just look around you." And he said he pointed out 3 other players and went, "They're the level that you should be at." So he said, "How do I get there?" And he went, "That's for you to work it out," and left. So one of the things he said he did was he then wrote a letter to himself. He said, "I went home that night and it stung me enough to write a letter to myself." And that's where the Xander letter comes in. So part Robin van Persie, because he does what I'll now describe with the benefits of. So the Xander letter is named after a guy called Ben Xander. He's the head of the Boston Philharmonic Orchestra. And he tells this story. He wrote a book with his wife called Rose Xander, called The Art of Possibility, years ago. It's quite an old book. And when he used to teach musical theory and things like that, he said one of his big frustrations is students would turn up fixated on getting an A. So they were outcome focused. They just want to get an A. And he was like, "But what I'm teaching you is about to appreciate music." And if you're not appreciating the craft, the mastery of it, and all you're focused on is the A, by definition, the course fails. So he came up with an idea he got them to write a Xander letter. And he said, if you write a Xander letter, I'll give you an A, because I guarantee we'll achieve it. So the idea was, he said, project yourself 12 months into the future. So if you were doing it, you do it as it's the 8th of May, 2026. And you write the letter as if the year that has just taken place. So you write it as it's a reflection. You talk about everything you've achieved, what you're proud of, all the things that you've experienced along the way. So you write the letter as if the year has happened. Now, what Ben Xander talks about is that what that does is it opens up the prefrontal cortex of your brain. So you start seeing possibilities rather than probabilities. You see opportunities rather than threats. So your brain is now looking for these things. And what Benjamin Xander said is, so you will achieve the things that you've wrote in the letter, because your brain now has a sense of direction of where we're going and a purpose for how to achieve it. So go back to Robin van Persie, this Dutch footballer. He said he writes himself a letter as if it's a year into the future, talking about what it feels like to be world class. And he says what that then led him to do is, over the course of the year, he starts making smarter decisions. He went, like, his friendship group he'd grown up with, and he said, I had this childish notion that the guys I grew up with in Rotterdam were going to come with me on this journey. And he went, but I realised that their behaviours were counterproductive for me being world class. So he contacts his friends from home and goes, listen, I love you and I'll always love you, but you can't come with me on the rest of this journey. We can't continue to associate with each other. He starts doing things like he realises he's emotionally impetuous, that he keeps getting sent off. So he then goes and seeks help to say, how do I control my temper? He talks about how he goes and speaks to the world-class footballers like Sol Campbell at the club and says, tell me what I need to be doing when I play against you. So he says just that writing that one letter forces him to start looking at a granular level at his daily habits that took him over that 12 months from being good to being great.
Love that. So that's tapping into imagery and visualization, which are techniques in sports psychology to envisage how an outcome's
going to... But it's the stuff that you guys have done. I believe you've done this looking forward today, this exercise this afternoon.
Yeah.
It's very similar to that, but this one, I'd say you can enhance it by looking at that year ahead. We're just writing it in a really personal letter to yourself.
So if we all wrote a letter, Xander letter to ourselves to say in 12 months' time, what's the type of leader I want to be, or what's the type of, how do I want to be performing in my role?
Yep.
And get as detailed as you can with that. And that will create the spark, the imagery and the visualization that will then help us make better choices to move towards that position. And this is actually scientific proven, because the students who actually did this and gave themselves an A and listed all the reasons as to why they did, most of them got an A.
Yeah,
it
exactly.
actually came to fruition. So
yeah,
there was results in it. Love that. Okay, let's move it into teams. I know you speak to a lot of individuals. We've done a lot on teamship here at the retreat. What is the best example of a high-performing team? Like a team you've worked with. I know I'm sure I can say you've worked with England.
Yeah.
You've worked with, many different teams, but what's the best team example that you've seen and why?
I did a piece of research about 12 years ago out at Barcelona Football Club. And they were really interesting because they took the concepts of teams seriously. Like, what I often find is when you work in, like, you'll see this as well as I will, Martin, that so many teams talk a good game about culture. It's one of the buzzwords, isn't it? Oh, we want to have a high-performing culture. We want a good culture. We've got to fix a culture. And then when you go in and say, give me a definition of culture, you'll get a dozen different definitions. So you go, well, you think you're working on the same agenda, but often you're not. So and there's two times that most teams ever work on culture. One is in pre-season, when you've just got time to fill, and the other time they work on it is when you've got beat consistently, and then you panic and think, oh, we'll fix a culture. Barcelona were a club that went, no, we're going to take this seriously. So there was a guy called Ferran Soriano that asked me to come in and do a piece of work. He's now the chief executive at City. And what he did was, he had him and a guy called Cheeky Begiristain that's just retired from City now. He was a director of football. And they looked at this idea of how culture could be the ultimate competitive advantage if you get it right. And what they found is that culture is one of these topics that there's research done from two guys that it goes back 25 years in the early 90s to two guys called Barron and Hannon, if you want to look at this. But they used to lecture to business leaders that get your culture right and it will be your ultimate competitive advantage. And most people would go, yeah, that makes sense. Have you got any evidence? And the reality was there was little out there. So these two guys, these professors at Stanford, went into Silicon Valley. There were loads of startup businesses. Said, if we can study this, we'll give you the research. So most businesses took them on. And what they found is that you bring a collection of people together as a team, you will have one of 5 different cultures. So when people say we're going to work on the culture, well, you've got a culture anyway. So what's more helpful is what type of culture do you have? So the first type of culture you can have is a star culture. And a star culture is what is almost in the popular narrative of what we think this stuff is. So you go after the most talented people you can, you pay them the highest salaries you can afford, you give them the best facilities available, and then you sit back and wait for all those talented people to deliver spectacular success. Now, what it blinds us to is one of the startup businesses they looked at in Silicon Valley was Google. So Google's spectacular success blinds us and everyone goes, that's what we need. Culture's about having Friday afternoon beers. Culture's about having a barber or a doctor or get your dry cleaning done. And you think it's all about that stuff. 98% of star cultures crash and burn. And there's a great line that I interviewed a guy called Diego Lopez once. He was the head coach of Real Madrid Football Club. He said, the trouble with the star culture is everyone wants to be the head waiter and nobody wants to wash their dishes. So it's often that lack of respect because everyone wants to be the superstar. So you go, you can do it, it's legitimate, but it's a high-risk strategy. The second type you can get is an autocratic model. So this is where you've got 1 or 2 leaders that just drive the standards. So decision-making is almost like, what would they do? How would they think? So a great example, Manchester United, take Ferguson out of the equation, the vacuum left behind. Take Steve Jobs out of the equation the first time around at Apple. The vacuum left behind creates dysfunction. The third type you get is a bureaucratic culture. This is where middle managers run the show. So you've got policies, procedures, rules and regulations, decisions made by committee. So it's slow, it's ponderous, it's not agile. It works, but it does. So Liverpool are a good example of that. Under the Fenway Group, they're a bureaucratic culture that just make decisions through stats and analytical models. The fourth type you get is an engineering culture. Engineering cultures is where you bring people in because they have a technical skill set. So I'm not worried about behavioural fit or any of the personality psychometrics you do. I'm just bringing you in because you're good at this skill set. The flaw of that is you get politics, because if knowledge is power, why am I going to share it with you if it dilutes my power base? You get lots of internal politics. But this is where it gets interesting, and I am coming to answer your question. The fifth type of culture is what's called a commitment culture. And a commitment culture has got 2 questions at the heart of it. What's our purpose? And what are our behaviours, right? So it says, this is what we're trying to do, and this is how we're trying to achieve it. Now, to answer your question, what they've found over 25 years is the culture that outperforms the rest on average by about 22% on every measure you want is the commitment culture. That's what they found in this Barron and Hannon study. So this is what Barcelona did and went, right, how do we do commitment culture models? So what you saw them do then, they made decisions at the time looked unpredictable or erratic, but they were doing it because they had a clear, defined view of we want a commitment culture. So when they appointed Pep Guardiola he'd been in the B team as the head coach, but he'd had 20 years as a player. So they had 3 behaviours at the club that they said, that's how we're going to do it. Humility, hard work, and being a team player first. So when you appointed Guardiola, they went, we can accelerate his football knowledge because he was only had 1 year as a novice. But we know this guy is going to role model the behaviours for the rest of the culture. So when he came in and then he wanted to get rid of cliques, so one of the first things they did, they allowed him to clear out the dressing room. So they had Ronaldinho, if you remember, the Brazilian footballer that was in there. One of his teammates gave me a great line when I interviewed him. He said he retired from playing, he just forgot to tell anyone. So he spent 18 months living the life of a playboy. But because he was an outsized personality, they let him get away with it. So then there was all kinds of dysfunction. When they turned a blind eye to this, in the 18 months that he was getting away with this, 13 out of the 25 players separated or divorced from long-term partners during that period, right? And 7 of them were caught in a compromising situation at a party at his house. They had an 18-year-old boy they'd thrown into the mix. Twice by his 18th birthday, Lionel Messi had been done for drink driving, on each occasion coming back from a party at Ronaldinho's house. So as one of the sort of cultural architects in the dressing room, this guy was compromising hard work, humility and team first. So they made the decision, don't care how popular he is, he needs to go. And they started to recruit in that way. So they had a really clear defined idea of, we want to represent the best of Catalonia to the world. That was their purpose. And they had a really clearly defined set of behaviours, and they were just consistent in every decision they made.
Love that, mate. I love the 5 cultures, because I bet we've been sat there in the audience thinking about your own organisations and which one probably describes and represents yours the best.
Well, what you often find is, yeah, you're right. So if you're looking at it, because if you view it through the lens of culture, often when you go into teams and they go, oh, there's politics here, there's issues, what you'll often find is it's often 2 types of cultures clashing. It might be an autocratic culture clashing with a bureaucratic culture, but then we make it about the personality, and it's not. It's just about the culture. And if we can define a set of behaviours, you can often resolve a lot of these issues.
Leadership. This is a leadership retreat. We talked a lot about leadership. These are all leaders in the room. Who's the best leader you've ever interviewed?
Oh, that's a good one. I'm going to answer it. A guy that I don't expect you'll be familiar with him. A man called Emmanuel Stewart.
Yeah, boxing trainer.
Yeah, so Manny Stewart is a boxing trainer. He's passed away now, but he based out in Detroit. And my contact with him came from I've done a couple of boxing biographies. And I was doing one on a fighter called Thomas Hearns. He was a 5-weight world champion that Manny Stewart had trained him in Detroit. And I don't know if any of you been to Detroit in the last few years, right? Don't, right? You don't need to. Right? It's sort of an industrial city. It's been built on the car industry. It's pretty bleak. And I was going to some of the poorest projects of inner city Detroit. And I mention that because it was bleak. It was gang, gun, drug culture. It was just endemic. And I was quite intimidated. Like it was quite scary. I stood out for lots of reasons. In fact, when I got dropped off outside the gym, the driver who dropped me off went, oh, look at that. And just above the handrail as you walk down the stairs, there was bullet holes that riddled your boot. Now, I've never seen that before. So I'm looking at it, my stomach's churning and I'm anxious. And I walk in and Manny Stewart's waiting for me. Right? And he goes, Damian, said, you're here at last. And I was like, hi, Manny, it's great to be here. Really looking forward to it. Because I thought it was such a warm response. I tried to match it. And then he said, that's really kind. He said, how do you really feel? Have you ever had verbal diarrhea? You might be looking at me thinking he's got it now, right? But verbal diarrhea, you know when your brain and mouth don't quite link up? Because that's what happened. And I stood in front of this bloke I admired, and I just start talking like an idiot. I start going, man, I know you're really busy. I can sit in the corner if you want. If you want me to come back, we can rearrange it. I can do it next year if you want. It's not a problem for me. And he sort of just watches me, sort of smiling, and then he goes, you come here, you. And he sort of grabs me, and he goes, you're my mate. He said, you're my guest. And I ended up staying a month with him and his family. And when I got... I was initially there for 2 weeks, but then he invited me into the family home. And I ended up spending a month doing the interviews and the research for the book. But over that month, I was interested in the culture created. And I said to him, I said, you know that first morning we met, Manny? He said, yeah. I said, you were really kind. And he said, oh, thank you. And I said, I thought I matched you. And he went, yeah, he was. I said, why did you ask me that second question? And he went, he said, well, let me tell you what the world looked like that morning. And he said, I saw this nervous-looking white English guy coming down the stairs telling me how excited he was to be there. He said, the words and the pictures didn't match up. So he said, so I'm looking at you thinking, this guy's either a liar or he's a sociopath. And he went, and I need to know who you are. So the second question, how do you really feel? You answered the second time, told me you were telling lies, but you were doing it to mask your own anxiety. And he went, so that's why I took you under my wing and said, you come in with me. He said, that's why I made you so welcome. And he said, but that's what I've been doing for 30 years. He said, you're here to try and explore how I created numerous world champions like Tommy Hearns. He went, the second question is when it starts. And he went, because most kids that come down those stairs feel the way you do. They're nervous, they're frightened, they're anxious, they're scared, they're worried about being exposed, they're worried about looking daft, they've got some bleak backstory going on. He went, I think I'm the best coach in the world at what I do. But I can't coach anybody when all that is going on in your head. He said, so I've got to take care of you. He had this great line. He said, I need to contain then explain. So what do you mean? He went, I've got to convince you. I've seen you, I've heard you, I'm on your side, I love you. He described that as containment. and then I can start to explain how you're going to be a champion. But he said, but too many coaches or leaders work on the other way around. They explain, then contain. So they come in with their standards, tell you what you need to do. And then if you manage to pass the test, then I'm your mate. He went, no, it doesn't work that way. I've got to convince you I love you before I give you the standards. So to me, he was a guy that I was around him for a long time enough to go, any of us could do that.
Love that. That's class. Mentality and resilience.
Yep.
I'm going to phrase it this way. Who's the biggest mentality monster you've ever interviewed or met? You know, just someone who's got that. You think, right, up there you are world class.
You're a rugby league fan, so I'm going to go to that territory because I spent a long time working in rugby league. You'll be familiar with Kevin Sinfield.
Mike Bates talked about him last night. He, you know,
the
work he's done for Rob Burrow on MND.
Well, I knew Kev when he was. So our mums got sacked at the same time, so we were on the picket line together when we were kids. So I knew him through our mum. But when our mums got sacked from the hospital, we were went along. I'm a bit older than Kev, but we were on the picket lines together. So we go back as far as that. And I've known him for years doing it, and I think but I'll offer you some different examples on what Mike could do. When he was a kid, Kev, I wasn't there for this one, but other people tell me the story. When he was playing for representative rugby league, and they do in a training camp, you might go to the pitches that evening, and all the kids get into the pitches and hammer the popcorn and the sweets and things like that. He was the only one that would cut fruit up and bring it along in a bag the night before. So it wasn't big grand gestures. It was just small everyday habits of a bloke that was maximising everything he was going to get out of it. And the nature of that, the way it rubbed off, people see it now from what he did with Rob and things like that. But he was just doing that all consistently. So I worked against him in one cup final with the team called Warrington, and we beat him at Wembley. We beat Leeds at Wembley. And because I'd known Kev, he was crying on the pitch, and I was thinking, I feel a bit awkward here. Like, what do I do? So I went over, and Kev, I'm really sorry, mate. And he was like, mate, he went, I'm gutted, but I'm pleased for you. And he was like, thank you. And he was really graceful. 4 months later, he beat the team I was working with in the grand final at Old Trafford. And I'm sat there feeling deflated. And he came over to me and did exactly. He was like, mate, I'm really sorry. So it was the consistency of it. Do you know what I mean? Whether he won or lost, he was just a really decent bloke.
Love that. Love that. So let me stay on mentality. How would you describe your own mentality? Because one of the things, and you won't mind saying, but when I first asked Damian to come and speak, he I think I'm going to try and recall what you actually said, but you said something along the lines of, mate, I'd love to. It'd be an absolute pleasure and an honour. And if I can get over my imposter syndrome, I'll try and do a good job for you. And in that moment, that vulnerability came right through. So how would you describe your own mentality? And is there vulnerability in there?
Well, definitely. It's a work in progress, I'd say, mentality. I often think that it's environmental a lot of the time, doesn't it? I think of it, mentality as in, what are the demands, what's your ability, and what are the consequences, where you focus on it. So, to give you a bit of context, I grew up in a boxing gym. So where my story started, my dad was a boxing coach in the city, Manchester. So I was around people that were really bulletproof mentality from a really young age. Guys going on to Olympic Games, gold medals, coming back, going to become world champion and things like that. So I was around it from a really young age, but I was never impressed by the spotlight. What went on under the spotlight to me was always just a manifestation of what I'd seen for months beforehand, of the habits and the daily things. So my mentality is to focus on the small things, not on the big outcome stuff. And that's what I often remind myself, because I was conditioned by that. The guy that would show up 5 minutes late and always have an excuse, that, like when you're in a boxing ring, well, that's going to manifest itself in a lack of discipline. When it comes to the later rounds, that's going to manifest itself in some way that will cost you. So my mentality has often been to focus on the small steps and not worry so much about the big stuff. Yeah. But sometimes it can be hard. You can get distracted by it. So that's why I say it's a work in progress. But the other thing that when you talk about the vulnerability, the humility bit is key. But again, it comes back to that environment that if you don't go around being a big mouth, don't go around telling people what you can do, what you stand for. Just prove it through the small everyday actions. It sort of speaks really powerfully to me.
Love that, mate. Last thing, if there was one piece of advice you will give us to finish off this retreat and take away with us as we go home tomorrow, anything from any of your interviews, your findings, etc. And I know that's a hard question because I'm asking to pick one, but if you could, what would it be?
It's one that sounds like it should be on a tea towel, a bit of advice, but I'll explain the origins of it, which is simply just be kind to yourself. And I say it because I think I describe my mentality as a work in progress. I think this is the bit that I've come to latest in my life, but actually I should have been applying a lot sooner. I think sometimes when you have high aspirations or you're driven or you want to achieve stuff, that's why you're here. That's why you're working with Martin and the T2 team. I get that you're here because you want to do that. The danger is you can trade other stuff. And I think I interviewed a guy called Greg Hoffman, who was the chief marketer of Nike. And he had this lovely line. He said, failure is the price of ambition. Failure is baked into the process. If you've got big ambition, you better just accept that failure is part of it. And what I didn't appreciate is that, so if you're going to fail, how you respond to that is key. So what I did for years was hammer myself for it. I'd be sort of like self-lacerating. You idiot, how you that? And beat yourself up. I'll stay awake at night thinking, how could I have been so stupid? And so that inner voice was always quite cruel. And I think what it led to is burnout. It led to there's a struggle to actually learn lessons as fast as you could. And you keep making the same mistake because if you assume you're an idiot rather than actually I was doing my best in the moment with what I had, you can learn so much better. And what I found is, I think once you can start role modeling being kind to yourself, you then have the capacity to be kind to other people because you can see that they're on a journey and they're trying the best. But what prompted me to start on this bit was, I remember somebody saying to me, how would you feel if someone spoke to your son the way that you speak to yourself? And it left me bereft. I went, you'd kill somebody if he felt like you were speaking to your son in such a cruel way. I was like, but I'm doing it to myself and I can't ask him to learn to be kind if I'm not doing it to myself. So it sounds trite, like say, like it should be on a tea towel or people #be kind on social media. I don't mean it like that. I'm talking about genuinely role model, kindness, understanding and empathy to yourself. And by definition, you'll start doing it to others.
Love that. And just lastly from me, what's the chances of you getting me on your podcast? Because I could kind of do with them 250 million views, you know? That would be absolutely awesome. Listen, I could talk to you all day long. We are going to stay up here for questions. We've got a good 10 minutes for questions with Damian. But I'd just like to say, I literally could do 3 hours with you up here.
Oh, well, thank you.
The storytelling, I'm so intrigued about. I'm probably going to pick your brains over dinner, all the people you've met and interviewed. And I just felt so relaxed up here doing that. And I'm sure you'll all agree and just say a huge T2 retreat thank you to Professor Damian Hughes.
Thank you.